Hello and welcome to the Infinite Improvisation Podcast. I'm Lauren Best here with Steve Treseler. And we're looking forward to another How episode.
Yeah, so this fourth How episode is about deep listening, or listening as a creative practice. Instead of thinking and planning, and how do we listen in different ways to inform our art and creating new art and new music.
Awesome. And it's so important. I mean, we also can't stop doing it, listening, but we can change how we're listening.
Yeah, exactly. And so this deep listening as a practice, the term deep listening comes from a multi-instrumentalist and composer, PAULINE OLIVEROS, who created this deep listening as a practice as her time as a composer and teaching at Mills College. And she's going to help guide our discussion. And actually going to play a short quote. It's a little 1-minute video for talking about listening and consciousness. So this is related to what you just said. So here's Pauline.
Hearing being what happens with the ear, and that what the ear does. I mean, I'm getting pretty radical in saying I think that that which is called ear training in music schools is really wrong. Mm-hmm. You can't train the ear; it does what it does, right?
Yep. It's a microphone.
It's a microphone.
It's a
very cool microphone. It does what it does. But what can be trained is listening, and that's what technology is doing. Is changing the way we listen. It can't change the way we hear, but it can. Our listening is the kind. I think that listening is probably very close to what we call consciousness.
Yeah, so as you're saying, we can't turn off our ears, but we can direct our attention to pay attention to what's coming in. You know, we have a lot of information coming in from all our senses that we ignore regularly, mm-hmm. whether it's the sensations of your feet in your shoes right now, or who knows, the feeling of the saliva in your mouth. Oh, as soon as you pay attention to it, you've got all this input that we're largely mm-hmm. ignoring because brains can't pay attention to all of it. So here's a quote from her Deep Listening handbook. The deep listening is a form of meditation. Attention is directed to the interplay of sounds and silences. Sound is not limited to musical or speaking sounds, but inclusive of all perceptible vibrations.
Awesome.
And
I find so much, like, once we start listening, at least for myself, I start to think, how was I ignoring that before? Mm-hmm. Like, as you're saying, we can start to become aware of so much more than we even knew was mm-hmm. happening.
Yeah, and that's something I do with students and in workshops, that we just kind of stop to listen to all the ambient sounds in our environment. We talk about music being sound on silence, but it's rarely actually silence. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if this makes great radio, but let's just take a moment. Everyone, we're going to listen to our environment and see if you can draw your attention to something that you weren't aware of. Here we go. A little dead air. Okay, we're still here. The show's still going. What did you hear in your environment, or some directed listening?
Well, I took off the ear cup also, mm-hmm. but I couldn't help but notice the amount of sound that was actually being created by my hair and headphones moving against one another, and just like, I mean, that's what's closest to my ear. I was hoping to listen outward more, right? Yeah. But I actually found that there was so much that I was noticing, like, just from that, and from like the not hum, but just like the room sound mm-hmm. in my headphones. So I still actually didn't get beyond this part of my head because I was suddenly so aware of that.
Yeah. So how often do you hear your hair in your headphones and just ignore it, right? So now as soon as you take your attention to it, it's like, oh wow, that is really loud. Yeah, I heard some. I mean, I knew I was going to hear some traffic sounds, and I thought I heard some water dripping. I was like, where's that coming from? And then I forgot there's a clock in here that's ticking. I was like, oh yeah, I'm in this room hours now, even without headphones on, and I'm not even aware of the clock ticking. I'm like, can you hear that in all the things I've been recording from home? Is there always a clock ticking there that I just didn't thinking about? Oh, there's all these sounds that are going into my home recordings. But
yeah, I remember being in a massage and towards the end noticing that there's a clock ticking. And I'm thinking, how do you work in this room all day long with that clock ticking there? And then I realized, like, I didn't even notice it. Mm-hmm. But then once I did, I really did. Yeah.
So that kind of listening to our environment is one type of listening we're doing creatively, just what's around us, that kind of receptive listening. I don't know, what are your thoughts on either expanding on that or other ways or directions that we listen?
Oh, I just keep thinking about, I'm not sure if this is answering your question as you were hoping.
Okay.
But this moment earlier in the spring where I saw this like tiny little bug jump in the grass because I was out in the grass with my kid, and it looked like a tiny grasshopper, like tinier than I'd ever seen grasshopper before. Like, you know, we're talking about like half a centimeter long. I'm showing I'm Canadian because I'm giving you a centimeter. And it jumped, but I could actually hear it land because there were like leaves and like things in the grass. And so like, even though it was this like tiny bug, I could hear its little tiny footsteps, right? As it landed on something. And so even though I hadn't noticed this, like any bugs before then, you know, and then once I noticed one and how it went like, you know, as it landed on this little leaf, I noticed suddenly that there were tons of these tiny little jumping bugs, and I could hear their little jumps. And so like once I drew my attention to it and I was quiet, even though I only saw one at first, I heard more footsteps, right? And I was like, there are more of them. I can hear them, because I could hear them jumping all around me. And then I looked more closely and I could see these tiny little jumping things.
Yeah, and how does that, is there some lesson there? I'm not sure.
You never know whose footsteps you're ignoring.
Yeah.
Well, I think it but a visual cue drew my attention towards it, right? So listening is not always a question of just like turning our ears, right? Like we're sometimes using other cues to see what happens there, or like creating situations where we're making sounds in new ways, but it's also engaging our listening and our perception in new ways. An activity I've done in classes with young people and their teachers that I read about from the works of R. Murray Schafer, who's a Canadian composer, is passing around a piece of paper and getting every student to make a different sound with this piece of paper. And so that's partially like a creative exercise. We're trying to like invent different ways of using this piece of paper. But what it also is that suddenly you have this group of 20 or 30 people who are all listening really intently to a piece of paper. And we're trying to hear all the details in the sounds that are created, which are of a much different like volume level and timbre than we're often expecting when we're doing something creative with sound.
Yeah. And even relating it back to other senses, right? Pauline was saying that it's the perception, or all perceptible vibrations. So that can include light, I suppose. But yeah, turning your attention, it can be very broad, where you're taking in everything that's coming in around you, or like narrowly focus it. You know, is it like a narrow beam of light or like a spotlight, what we're taking in? And this can happen. I mean, if we're going to relate that to a musical performance too, it's a important skill to be able to listen broadly, maybe to the sound of the entire ensemble in the room around us, but then we have to like narrow into, if you have a stand partner, you're playing, listen to the person next to you, or turn your attention to one instrument or an entire section, just different ways of using that same kind of attention in that kind of context, whether you're listening narrowly or broadly.
Yeah, and it really draws to mind how like very specific knowledge or skills, like to kind of use that, we want to go through listening and not necessarily through like like there are times to create with it too. But I'm thinking of two things. One is bird calls, right? How like you can go out at a particular time of year or in a particular place, and if you aren't familiar with the bird calls, you might not even notice them at all. Or you might notice them and be like, oh, those birds are kind of noisy, right? But if you're at all becoming familiar with bird calls, even if you only know one, right, then you probably hear the chorus of birds. I always end up talking about the birds. You might hear the chorus of birds and then you're like, and a blue jay, you know? But then like as you gain more knowledge of the different kinds of bird calls, through listening, you start to have a different kind of experience of that because you're able to connect it to similarities and differences or to birds you know, or maybe you're like, I don't know that one, but it sounds kind of like this. And suddenly it's a much deeper and richer experience.
And then we can buy that app we were talking about that'll identify it for you. And maybe
there's a free one. Oh. I found it.
Okay.
Free,
we'll see if they're any good. And does that make the experience better or worse? I'm not sure. But that anyway, I want to try it. But that's interesting because our ear being like the microphone, it just pulls in all these the bird songs. But what is familiar, and what have we trained ourselves to hear?
Yeah,
relating and so back to ear training, like hearing, this is your brain's getting the same input, but now something unfamiliar becomes familiar, and it means something different.
Totally. And so I think of like the elements of music and how we often train ourselves to listen to notes and rhythm. And like we often actually don't spend nearly as much time paying just as much attention to other qualities, like to the kind of to the timbre, to the groove, or to like there even articulation. I think sometimes it depends on the instrument maybe, but sometimes suffers because we're so focused on hitting notes or hitting particular rhythms. Sometimes when we're learning, we're only focused on the notes and we forget about the rhythms too. But that kind of increasing the depth or the quality of our listening overall means we're going to be getting much more out of that listening experience.
Yeah, timbre is a huge one for me. Some of my favorite musical just the particular sound of the instruments or even the recording production or something that just draws me in, realizing I can hear like a live performance of something that was like a casual recording. It's like, it doesn't reach me the same way. It might be the same notes, but without this like immersive timbre that's so captivating, it falls flat. But also listening to talk about the dynamics or even the form, paying attention to how is this developing, beyond the notes and rhythms.
Yeah, and then when we talk about form, it becomes like we can listen in these really short moments, and then there's the what happens when we listen over a longer period of time, and how our perception changes when the amount of time is stretched.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or when the form within that time is changing.
Yeah, so this is largely, I guess, in the category of listening where we're being perceptive to what's going on around us, and also what's in this category is listening deeply as we're training as musicians, finding really inspiring artists or recordings or live performances, and listening really deeply and trying to assimilate and copy what we can. I mean, that's a stage we all continue to go through, but especially when we're in the early development stages, having these models and listening closely to that. And in the next episode too, we'll be talking about like deep listening to recordings of ourselves and our performances, and again, and this is all related to listening to the little bugs popping around too, but with that level of intensity and focus.
But what's interesting is like you refer to the intensity and focus of it, but in that moment it felt like super easy. Like it didn't feel like I had to like really focus in. It's not like I was like, I have to hear these bugs. Like it wasn't like that, even though it was like a high degree of attention and focus, it felt really gentle and exploratory, and that's what I love about the listening as opposed to doing, is we can access, I think, different states of consciousness and different states of being.
Yeah, from that performance psychology class I took through Noah Kageyama's The Bulletproof Musician course, he kind of brings, we're like, how do we focus, and like trying to make sure we're focused. Actually, our brains are designed to focus. If the right thing triggers our attention, we don't have to try hard to focus You know, you turn on a screen in a room full of preschoolers and they don't have to try to the right novel stimulus comes in and we just zero in on it. So where it does get hard if we're forcing ourselves to focus on something that's not engaging or interesting, or doing your taxes or something. Okay, I've got to focus on this. It feels like a real stretch. I wanted to share some of Pauline's deep listening pieces, and this comes from her deep listening, a composer's sound practice. And what she says about her compositions: the range of notational practices employed to present my work as a composer includes conventional staff notation, graphic notation, metaphors, prose, oral instruction, and recorded media. And sonic meditations are notated through prose instructions or recipes. And some of these are in written form only, and she'll change these instructions, adapting them to the people in the room. And so here's one called Earpiece. It's a series of 13 questions. And so her piece of music is your response to these questions is the piece. All right. Lauren and listeners, you ready?
But hold on. I'm going to engage with these questions like me and the listeners are doing this together.
Yeah, you're doing this, and you're listening to the own answers. So this is the dialogue in your head.
Okay.
So if you feel moved to shout out a response, I suppose that's okay. But, all right. So Earpiece is from 1998 by PAULINE OLIVEROS. Are you listening now? Are you listening to what you are now hearing? Are you hearing while you listen? Are you listening while you are hearing? Do you remember the last sound you heard before this question? What will you hear in the near future? Can you hear now and also listen to your memory of an old sound? What causes you to listen? Do you hear yourself in your daily life? Do you have healthy ears? If you could hear any sound you want, what would it be? Are you listening to sounds now or just hearing them? What sound is most meaningful to you? There we go. There's our first deep listening piece.
I have to say, that was incredibly challenging because I was hearing my baby waking up from his nap and crying. And so for all of these questions, that sound was literally in the background. And I just felt myself getting increasingly, and someone's getting the baby, don't worry. But I felt myself getting increasingly hotter and unable to think of the responses I wanted to instead of this sound, which was so connected to me at the core that it was like overtaking my consciousness.
But that was it. That was your art experience.
Exactly. And it was a very physical experience of that.
Yeah, so it's but so, I mean, you were thinking the experience was going to be something else, and that's what it was.
Exactly. It's as it so often goes, right?
Yeah. But a lot of those questions, are you hearing while you're listening? Are you listening while you're hearing? If we hadn't but listen to the clip of her talking, you might be like, well, what's the why is she harping on this hearing versus listening? We have a little more insight into what that means. But this actually... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking the way the questions are designed, though, is that even if we hadn't have had that, I think that it sort of leads to those considerations.
Yeah. And those questions also transition into another area that I want to get to, which is audiation, which is imagined sounds. So sounds that we're imagining on our own. Like, can you also listen to a memory of an old sound? And this is... incredibly important tool as a musician, well, and as a human and a human musician, listening and imagining previous sounds, or listening to sounds that you're dreaming up on your own.
And it also starts to ask us how much of what we think we hear is actually imagined sound based on what we are expecting things to sound like.
Yeah.
And how much are we actually hearing all the sound at the time.
That reminds me. A friend of mine, Michael Van Beber, is transcribing a bunch of famous Charlie Parker solos that have already been transcribed before, but now it's known for having some errors in the famous version. So he's redoing it to be complete, and he's realizing there's certain notes that were written down that everyone plays, and you listen to Charlie Parker's recording and you think the notes are there, and you listen, but he was just slowing down and filtering stuff out, and these notes just aren't there, but we hear them because we're so used to looking at them and having played them ourselves. So you listen to the recording and you hear these notes that aren't actually there. Totally.
Or if you listen back to yourself speaking or other people speaking, or, people will leave out words or not say the word they meant to, and often we still understand it, and we just, there's things like this with reading too, right? Like where we can remove some of the words and still read it, or read things that are, I've seen things that are half French, half English, and I can, I can still read it even though it actually doesn't really make sense, but our brains are able to put things together. That's a little different than half French, half English, but when actual letters are removed, it can work.
Yeah. And so it's a fairly recent term, this idea of audiation, which is a word I think I said earlier, which is it's imagined sound. So sort of the idea of visualization. You can imagine your childhood home. If you close your eyes, you can see a picture of it. But audiation is hearing sounds, maybe getting a song stuck in your head, or if you can imagine now, think of a piece of music that's really important to you. Take another dead air time, but just think of a piece of music and then imagine hitting the play button and you're listening to it and try to hear it as vividly as if you were listening through speakers or hearing it live. Okay, well, hit pause. So everyone who's listening, we were all in the same space together, but everyone's having a vividly different experience unless we happen to all choose to listen to the same song.
And interestingly, even if we all did the same song, like if we all imagined like Happy Birthday to You, the Happy Birthday song, each of us are going to imagine that differently, right? And so if I said, imagine the last time you heard Happy Birthday.
Yeah.
Right, but I imagine yourself singing Happy Birthday. And I think it gets for some people, some of these will be harder or easier for other people. And then if I said, imagine a flute playing Happy Birthday. Imagine bagpipes playing Happy Birthday.
Yeah, and we're all hearing it slightly differently from what we're imagining, or even more narrow. Imagine by John Lennon, and we all hear it in our head. We all remember it slightly differently, so it's not going to be the same experience. But drawing on that is so important, especially if we're getting to improvising or creating our own music. One approach is being able to, you may pre-hear or audiate something in your head, and then you want to get it on the outside on your instrument. And as we were talking off air about that, there's different approaches. Are we supposed to be playing what we hear or pre-hear, or play something or sing something that might surprise us? And there's a couple little quotes here I've queued up for my ebook, but Art Farmer, the renowned jazz trumpet player, says you really have to practice the coordination between the mind and the fingers, the ideas and the body. And you have to practice finding the ideas on your horn and getting there at the same time as the idea comes into your head. It's a matter of developing instant touch. So I like calling it that. And one other, we'll have this queued up, Stephen Nachmanovich, another quote from Free Play. Where do we go to listen to the music that has not yet been heard? There is a place in our body where we can listen, where we can turn and listen. If we go there and become quiet, we can start to bring the music up.
Mm-hmm. And I'm very curious about different forms of audiation and how different people may experience that differently. And some people, pair visualizations with audiation, or for some people that comes really naturally to pair visualizations, or some people have other like synesthesia type experiences with audiation. But I know with visual imagery, like some people think in images and some people do not have visual imagery regularly. And some people have like an internal dialogue or internal narrative, and they would say like they think in words, which apparently not everyone does. So I'm very curious, and I'm asking this before like looking into it in a lot of detail. I'm sure there's been some research around it, but I'm guessing that we are going to learn more and more about audiation and about how, like how different individuals may be unique from one another, and how that may compare or contrast between different people and different life stages and different cultures.
Yeah, and it's we're just how our memories are formed. It's not like we just hit record on a camera and document everything. It's just this could be why eyewitness testimony isn't really reliable, because what we remember isn't the same thing as what happened, the way that our brain stores it and packages it. So it's similar with audiation. And I imagine some people can hear people hear things in different ways, and some might imagine music on a staff paper, or as with synesthesia which is crossed senses in some ways, where some people who hear particular sounds, it activates the visual centers, or certain touches might taste a certain way, or so that'd be interesting. Interesting to know. Yeah, look into what kind of research is out there. Yeah, I don't know much about that.
What they do know, that I've read up on a little lately, is that in the development of audiation, comparison between different, like for example, different tonalities is important. So they have done experiments with children where they listen to all major music, and then like to a variety, like music in a variety of tonalities, and they found that the children who listened to a greater variety sang more in tune in major keys. Not like one might think, if they listen to all major keys, that's what they're going to know best, and that's what they'll perform best. But it was actually the variety gave them a way of comparing different things, and so they had a better understanding of the major tonalities by hearing a wider variety of tonalities. We need comparison in order to be able to make meaning, and so. Again, this brings us back to the importance of listening and of developing our listening and of exposing ourselves to different types of things to listen to, but also just increasing our awareness so we can let our conscious and our subconscious do that comparing.
Yeah. I remember reading, I'm trying to remember where I read this, but some studies about developing perfect pitch, like hearing a note on an instrument and knowing what the name of it is. So it's something that a majority of musicians, even professionals, cannot do. And a lot of, like, I grew up just thinking it's just something you're born with. Some people have perfect pitch and go, oh, that's an F sharp minor chord. And a lot of us can hear the intervals and the relationships between the notes, but not the absolute pitch most of the time. But I had heard it looked like that it is something that can be developed, but during that early critical period, if it was before age 4 or 5, so it's sort of the same time where we're more easier for us to learn native languages and other things like that. So it is something you can learn. I've known someone as an adult that was working really hard to do it and got pretty close, but
nice.
It's interesting at how that all develops. But yeah, back to audiation. I'd like to. Do you want to play a game?
Yeah, let's play a game.
No, this is the intuitive melody game. haven't quite set it up like a game, I guess. But when I say, do you want to
still
play a game? Do you want to compose a song? It's always, people are like, okay, let's do it. So let's each do this. I'll walk you through it and I'll go through the same process. So basically taking, so I'll have you, at the keyboard.
I'm at the keyboard.
And the microphone, if as possible. And just taking a few breaths just to kind of center yourself a bit. And then what I want you to do is sing a pitch and then match it and find it at the piano. So I don't know if you have perfect pitch. If you do, it's easy to match it on the piano. Otherwise, it's a little trial and error, or you may be in between notes on the piano, but
I do not have perfect pitch. Spoiler.
Okay, so sing a note, and then you'll find the nearest one at the piano through trial and error, and then you'll match singing and playing it.
Cool. I actually hear the note already.
Okay.
Which is I was not expecting. I was hoping to just sing, and then but.
Find that note.
It was, I think, closest to A flat.
Okay, so now you'll play and sing the pitch and listen and let your inner hearing guide the next note. It'll reveal the next note of your melody. Then sing the second pitch and find it on the keyboard. So it's like listening, singing, playing. So start with the A flat and then move to the next one. There we go. Now you got your two note melody. So sing and play it at the same time?
Together or in sequence?
In sequence. Major third. See, I was hearing a minor third. I think that might have been wrong. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't think I was singing in pitch. Like, I think I sang a very flat. Or did you?
No. I mean, in my head. That was what you were singing.
In your head to go between.
Yeah, no. I was making a bad joke, but.
But I don't think I sang exactly the C, and I didn't as I was singing it, I was kind of like, I don't know if that's even what I wanted to play. Like, why that note? Thanks, brain.
Yeah.
And then as I played it, it was really interesting. It was like I was like, just the piano is in such everything is so discrete, right? And so
that's the problem with doing this with a piano. Now we're boxed into Western equal temperament, which
totally
that's its own issue.
Yeah, my instinct was to go a little out of that. It was strange.
I guess we'll use your keyboard as a limitation for now, but okay. Yeah. But analysis after creating, right? That's next episode. So let's then just continue that process. So now play your first two notes, and then sing the third, and then continue that process until it feels like you've reached the end of a phrase. And then sing those three in sequence, and then add the next.
It's really hard to turn off my brain for this. I think I should try it with my eyes closed sometime, because I'm hearing things before it's even time to hear the next thing. So then when it's time to hear the next thing, I end up hearing a different thing, and I'm having to consciously choose whether to follow what I remember hearing or what I am now.
Either way can work. I would just wait until that exact moment and see what you hear.
Yeah.
Hear then. All right, let's keep going, unless that's the end of your phrase.
It's very hard not to follow it. It's so hard.
Yeah. That can work too. Well, what can you follow it and play? So this is what Art Farmer was talking about, the instant touch. Can you play? So okay, well let's release the limitation and just let you go.
Yeah, I feel like I'm cheating all over the place. It's like they're like so interconnected. I think, you know what I mean? Like it's so hard to turn off my brain. Like and actually I was doing this morning on guitar. Much harder on guitar because I'm not nearly as fluent with guitar as I am with piano.
But yeah, if you make the adaptation, I mean, the whole point of this is to create a melody through listening and intuiting the melody rather than trying to plan and think of something like you're like revealing a melody that's already there.
Yeah, and it felt like so many melodies were emerging so quickly.
Oh.
You know, do you find that is like somewhat typical that like you're just trying to hear the next note and you're hearing like the next 6 notes?
Yeah, often, or I can hear it in 2 different directions, or on purpose, the first thing that I hear, I'll like reject it and like, let's hear something else. And I'll do that just to maybe break out of maybe patterns that I fall into. Yeah. So that definitely happens. But if you do it in the step where you do it one note at a time, sometimes, following different process, you'll get different results.
And interestingly, it's like it picked up steam as it went. So, right, like the first note was one thing. And then once I had 2 notes, right, like the second note felt a little off. But then like once I ended up in a major tonality, like my brain was like, I know where this goes. Yeah. And then suddenly like every thought I had, even if I tried to be like, not that, let's do this, then it would still be like, there were just like my audiation would run away from me. Like, every time, like it would just be like,
yeah. And in this case, this is the time where you just kind of follow what you hear and follow the intuition. I think that would work. But if you feel like you're always slipping into similar tonalities and you want to break out of it, that's where we use limitations from the previous episode which is a different challenge where then you're putting a different set of limitations.
And if I was doing this with myself, like, you know what I mean? Like if I was like just spending a bunch of time trying to like use this sort of as a prompt, what I think I would do is, because I'm having like melodies upon melodies upon melodies, is I would kind of like free play and sort of try to get some of those out. Or maybe even sing a bunch of them and just let it like go, 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 because then they would already be out. They would already have something I like created and remembered and I can remember doing, in hopes that then I could approach the activity with like, you know what I mean? Like I've gotten them out of the way, kind of, is one approach I might take.
Yeah, and recording all of that so you can come back to it, and maybe it could be different sections of it. And
totally, and like sometimes it's like,
it must be so hard for you to have an endless flow of musical ideas.
Well, I was gonna say it's not like it's sort of like, oh, I guess I have lots of ideas right now. Great, but like it's not necessarily like, it feels almost like remembering someone else's idea. Like it's not, it's like how with language, right? We get to a point with language where if you hear someone say half of a sentence, you can likely finish their sentence. And it might not be correct, but it will sort of like seem right. And then, you reach a point where if you hear someone give half of a speech, you might be able to like make up the entire second half of the speech, right? But yeah, sometimes it feels like there's lots and lots of ideas, but it's almost like they aren't, like I'm not directing them the way I want. You know what I mean? It's like I'm hearing them, but it's not necessarily what I'm looking for, what I'm wishing would appear. It's like this flow. So the other strategy I would take with myself, if you're curious, is I would try this like really, 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 really slowly. Like I would spend like 30 seconds to a minute with each note. So that I tried to like remove myself from some of those other like urges and ideas, and rather than like finishing the sentence with what comes to mind right away, because my brain can just do that, right? I would try to like really sink into each note and see if by stretching it out, I could kind of remove myself from some of those like typical like cadences.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's nothing wrong with coming up with something that's in typical cadences, but I felt like I was responding with, well, I felt like I was like some politicians who say a lot of catchphrases.
And you're just going back to your sound bites. Well, and then I know people, when you come up with something and it seems like you're remembering it, and then people are worried about, oh no, is this already another song? Did I steal someone else's song? Like you accidentally wrote something that you're just remembering. And at this point, just keep going with it. I guess got Beatles on the brain. When Paul McCartney wrote Yesterday, at that point it was scrambled eggs was the first line. He was walking around. Wait, has someone else wrote this? He thought that, someone was describing him walking around like he thought he was Beethoven or something. He had this melody, but he was so convinced that he didn't write it. He just thought it was a gem and wasn't sure if it was really his or not. But
yeah, totally.
I guess we'll get to that later. Well, let's hear you try a slow one, and then if your brain, trying to finish the phrase, you can just kind of let those be there. But then when it comes time for the next note, listen for what you're hearing there for one note, and then play the first few, and then add the next one, and see if we can slow down the stream of wanting to finish the next 7 in a row.
And I'm also going to try not to look at the piano so I can't think about the key.
Yeah.
So I can't think as much about what's going on.
Yeah.
Wow.
There you go. That'll teach you to look at the keyboard. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. It's funny. I thought it was maybe G. It's F.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I felt like I want to go in between pitches.
Yeah.
I didn't look, I swear. I made it.
So now play your whole phrase from the beginning. Yeah, sing and play it, and then continue on until the phrase is over.
I still want to... if we weren't recording right now, I would have hung out on some of those notes and just dipped the pitches and stuff. I'm feeling very quarter tony today.
Yeah, well, that's that is a potential shortcoming of doing it this way. The instant touch, but through doing it at the moment in equal temperament. But
at the same time, that was cool. It was it was very interesting to me that urge emerged this time around, because I was kind of having, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting the process. Yeah. I was kind of having that the first time, right? But I squashed it. And then I was playing, had all these things in mind that were really pretty consonant. And then there I was feeling really just experimenting with just sliding pitches. Yeah. If we weren't recording where I was trying to keep picking notes, I probably would have just done a lot of slipping and sliding. Yeah. Which I actually I do that with the seaboard exploring, or even with pitch bending on the piano, and certainly with the voice. Lots of, especially having played so much piano where it is equal temperament, really experimenting with what we do with pitch and the voice, and noticing how others do that. So
is your phrase complete, or was that an interruption in the middle?
I didn't get the last note. Yeah, I was, I said, I was feeling a lot of more, chromatic movement and sliding. So again, I find these kinds of prompts, I'm always wanting to break the rules. I'm oh, that's great. Now I have an idea for something else I can do with it.
Yeah, and maybe that's it. If you're trying to like come up with some new ideas, it might be that. So then you make the decision. It's like, am I going to stay within the limitation as the challenge and not go off onto something else, or you follow the, you eat the marshmallow and go in that. Oh, I'm feeling slidey pitch. Let's get rid of the piano, or be able to have the pitch bend, and it may set you out into something else. So when does it smart to stick with the limitation for the challenge? And when does that might just set the stage for something else? Like you have some kind of writing prompt for a poem, and then you have this other idea, and then just go and do that. But either way, you've solved the problem.
But slowing down, definitely cool to see in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Did it appear to you to be quite significantly slower than the first round?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the first you were just going, and you had heard this like kind of more stream of consciousness, like you were improvising, and I mean you were like more like performance improvisation, where you just kind of hear the next flow of lines and go with it. And this one, it's slowing down.
Yeah, and it did feel slower, but I think I was surprised at how effective that was.
Yeah.
Because like I don't feel like the Runaway Train as much. I feel like I'm going to be hearing for the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a little more what I was expecting from the exercise and how people approach it. But it goes different ways. But then I mean you're learning something about the process, and are you when to go with the Runaway Train or when to slow down, and which melody ends up being more meaningful. It's interesting. Okay,
and it's amazing how much my audiation really like changed.
Yeah.
Still the same person sitting here, still the same piano, same episode, right? Like we didn't change that much, but my audiation experience was totally different.
Yeah. Cool.
And like at the end, I was like, oh, do I have to end the phrase here? I was like, that's the note. I hear it. Fine.
Yeah. You've quite a vivid internal conversation going with yourself.
I didn't actually say all those things, but I just mean like I had some resist. I think I don't talk with myself as much as some people do, but that's what the energy would have said. I mean, because like I didn't really want to end on that note, but I was like, there it is. It's in my head. I hear it. Can't lie about that to myself. Like,
that's awesome. Yeah, that's the process. I'll do a quick one.
Yeah.
And then we have to mash them together. No, I don't know what we do with these melodies. That's some other thing. Whoa. I don't know how I did that. Okay. And then at the end, I was like, oh, that was actually a whole tone thing. I don't normally like sing whole tone scales. How did that? It's the way it went.
Yeah. I love how surprises come out of it.
Yeah. Again, like, oh, what would be good here? Part of me was going like, oh, what would be good here? No, it's like, nope. Listen. Okay. And then there's all kinds of things you can do, take when we have these melodies. So I just like making a bunch of them, intuitive melody. And then you can choose one, and what you do with it, you can use that as a theme and do more variations and development, or that could be a bass line and you add something else on top of it, or you take the melody and put a bass line under it, or some kind of groove, or there's so many different things you can do. So in classes, sometimes I'll have a student play an intuitive melody that they wrote as the theme, and then other people have different roles to give it different sound environments. But anyway, just give everyone an introduction into the process of how we can use listening and audiation to actually generate something. And at a certain point when you've exercised this muscle, you can do it more on the fly, and being able to play and match what you're singing and playing at a faster rate. Or if I'm playing saxophone, I can't sing at the same time, but sometimes I can tell if I'm pre-hearing it and then play it. But if I'm playing a jazz solo and I pre-hear something and I play something else, I may try to go back to what I was hearing, or just be surprised by what I played, and then you don't have the time to go back and edit.
I keep thinking about like doing this without piano, because like I improvise vocally a lot, and so like I do this fairly often without actually finding the notes on the piano. I think it actually made me, well, I think it changed my audiation and my thinking. I think finding it on piano and playing it on piano almost made me less intuitive, because I started thinking about like the theory of it, or not looking at my fingers helped.
And I use this for folks. Sometimes people can intuitively sing something and then might not have an idea of how to map it, or whether it's important to write it down or not. That's a whole other thing. But if you want to,
yeah, totally.
Make a chart for other people to play and read. But no, I'm all for if we take it off the piano or take it out of equal temperament. That's all good. But I do have a lot of students. Part of this comes from, I have a lot of students that come in and go, I can sing all these ideas, but as soon as I put the saxophone in my mouth, it sounds awkward, and I'm trying to play the right notes and trying to make this connection between this like intuitive sense of something that's audiated and they can sing and it all fits. It even hits the harmony. And then you've got this obstacle of an instrument.
Yeah.
And nothing comes out. So that's what I like using this process. But in your case, for what you're talking about, ditch the, follow the intuitive melodies and ditch the piano and record it.
But it forced me to slow down and actually do something repeatable, because like I can improvise intuitive melodies all day long. In fact, I often do, right? But whether those are something that like I identify or repeat, like this helped kind of like tease that out and slow it down and put it in equal temperament, which for better or worse, today was me. It was very interesting to have my awareness brought to that, right? I wouldn't say I'm often not like, I wouldn't say I'm often like improvising in super slidey places, but sometimes I am, right? And so it kind of helped slow down and tease out what was going on, because as you're saying, like I could just sing and sing and sing like melodies otherwise, right? But this kind of creates a different type of process.
And for people that maybe, don't feel like they can sing and sing and sing melodies, like might be like me, who I'm not really a trained singer, so I don't intuitively. I mean, I still will noodle around and sing things, but he's like, I can't think of anything. We'll slow down and just listen, and listen to what it's. Yeah, this workshop by, who led the workshop? Anthony Wilson, guitar player, and it was called like Discovering or Revealing the Already Complete Musical Idea. And he had a bunch of us in a room do this. We listened and then wrote it down without an instrument. It was all just listening to notation. And then we all came up. It was pretty powerful. Then everyone played their piece, and we listened to what we were all just coming up with in our imagination, which is pretty awesome. Right on. I want to wrap up. Let's finish with another PAULINE Oliveros deep listening piece. You ready? So our final piece that we'll perform with our listeners here. This one's called Rhythms, 1996. What is the meter or tempo of your normal walk? How often do you blink? What is the current tempo of your breathing? What is the current tempo of your heart rate? What other rhythms do you hear if you listen? What is your relationship to all of the rhythms that you can perceive at once? What a performance.
I became aware during that I actually could hear my heartbeat. At first I was like, I can't hear my heartbeat. I don't know. I'm going to have to take my pulse. And then I was like, I can hear my heartbeat. I can hear that lub dub. It might only be because of the pressure of the headphones on my circulatory system, but I could, and really interesting.
Feel it. I don't know if I could hear it. I was definitely feeling it. Let's see. And I still hear traffic more than my heartbeat, but yeah, but then yeah, you're just this like physiological blob of rhythms, our breathing and our blinking and walking and all of that, and there's your piece, a really sophisticated polyrhythm with pulses that are shifting.
Yeah, totally.
And that's one we're performing all the time.
Well, and our relationship to rhythm, like I'm not someone who tends to listen to music when I run or jog, because like I'm either really with the rhythm or not with the rhythm, right? Like it's kind of like being with the rhythm or not becomes like central to what's happening, as opposed to it just being like a lighthearted way of like helping.
Oh, but then it's like a Steve Reich phasing or something. You're in or you're off, or if you've got like when there's like you're on the bus and the windshield wipers aren't synced with each other and they're together and get a little bit off. That kind of thing, and that can happen with your run. That doesn't make your run more enjoyable, apparently.
Yeah. Well, and then I'm like, am I tired? I don't know. I just have to stay with time.
Oh, yeah. And if it's a little too fast, like maybe a training regimen, or you got to get the right playlist at the right running tempo, I guess.
Yeah, and we didn't talk a whole lot about rhythm and about like just rhythm and breath and synchronization and entrainment and the power of that, which is pretty incredible, both like, just on a physical level of how things entrain, but how we entrain to each other, like how we fall into step with each other walking, how moving together helps us feel connected, because it literally does connect us. Like they've used music to help newborn, premature babies like regulate their heart rate and their breathing patterns, because of how much we can fall into sync with that.
Wow. It reminded me of, I think I read from Vijay Iyer, piano player, talking about just different musical phrases and mapping it to physiological process, like a musical phrase matches with the breath, and a pulse in the time signature would match with a step or a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. And more quickly moving frenetic kind of rhythms, like your fingers or your mouth, or things that are moving very quickly, but all these different rhythms existing at once. And what types of rhythms sound natural to us can be very much mapped to how they exist in our body. But that's another area of audiation too, which we can get to, pre-hearing a rhythm or a groove. And there's all kinds of other things that we can audiate, not just the pitches, like we were demonstrating today. Mm-hmm. Pre-hearing the rhythm, pre-hearing the timbre or the form or the instrumentation. There's all these things we can imagine other than just note by note.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And that again, and things that may like come more naturally to some people or other people, or, there isn't like a wrong way to audiate or to connect with rhythms. I'm thinking about how, just another thing with babies, how like the rhythms that babies hear in utero and in the first few months of their life, like imprint on them, and then they find those rhythms more recognizable and kind of easier to move to or to make music to, the rhythms that are presumably part of their culture, like what they've been exposed to in that kind of like key time. But we can certainly learn rhythms later too.
Sounds like we'll still have more to talk about. We can have another episode. Yeah, sounds good. And we've been discussing, we're going to be launching our Infinite Improvisation Discord. So you can join us for some of these experiments and conversations, and love to hear your intuitive melodies as we get that going, and conversations around these things. So we're looking forward to making this a multi-directional conversation. We certainly enjoy broadcasting to all of you, but getting folks connected. So you can join the mailing list at infiniteimprovisation.com and be kept up to date, and you'll learn when we get our community started.
Awesome. And I'm looking forward to it. Until next time.